Hello there, and thank you for tuning into this session of the Estriva Masterclass. We've got a power-packed episode for you to check out today. And also, don't forget, we've got a growing library of content featuring experts from around the globe who will help you level up your HR and talent acquisition skills. This episode is no different. We are talking about the topic of motivating passive talent. And we'll talk about talent that's sitting on the sidelines and talent within your organization. To talk about this topic, we have two experts from across the globe, Jenn Longbine and Laura Edwards. Please, Jenn, Laura, feel free to introduce yourselves, tell us your name, your title and company, and a fun fact that we wouldn't know about you if we weren't looking at your LinkedIn profile.
Okay, I'll go. I'm Jenn Longbine. I lead talent management, learning, and development for a company called Woven by Toyota. We are, the best way to describe it is essentially Toyota's software department, helping transform Toyota from a car company to truly a mobility company. So it's a very exciting place to be. Fun fact about me, although it's not that secret, you can see the guitar on my wall. I am a songwriter and a singer and a musician, have been my whole life. It's how I balance it, right?
Yes,
So
yes,
Libra.
yes.
It's
Welcome,
great to be
Jenn.
here. Thank you.
Laura, nice to
Great.
meet you.
Nice to meet you too. I'm Laura Edwards. I'm the head of talent at a company called Wakam, and we are an insurer, InsurTech. I head up talent acquisition, talent management, leadership development, and diversity and inclusion for the company. A fun fact about me, it's not so fun, I guess, but I'm a triplet. So I have two sisters the same age as me. Yeah.
So cool.
You all live very exciting lives, and hopefully our community will connect with
We're all
you
very different.
offline.
We're all very different, and we all live in different countries around the world, which is fun.
Very fascinating, very fascinating. And Jenn, your music career sounds interesting as well. Let's jump into our topics, though. The first thing we want to talk about with regard to engaging passive candidates is actually those that are within our organizations. So, could you tell me in your own words and experience, what are some of the underlying factors most frequently contributed to talent becoming passive within an organization? Jenn, we'll lead with you, and Laura, follow up, please.
It's such an interesting question because I think about passive talent in two ways. One is external talent from a recruiting standpoint, and then the other as an existing employee who maybe loses some of that engagement factor. And I think, it starts with hiring, finding people that are genuinely engaged in their domain. They're interested in what they do for a living. That tells you that they've chosen it with some intention. Maybe they're still curious about it. They want to grow in the space. You've got someone really interested in their work. And that's something I've always looked for. People ask me over the years, and that's one thing that hasn't really changed. What are you looking for when you hire? And I always say the same thing, people who love their work. Because again, I think it's about timing. We all have seasons of that. We come in and out of our own level of engagement when it comes to the domain that we work in. And so I think if you're finding someone who's engaged at the time, that's great. You bring them in, they're more likely to stay engaged in their domain at your company, right? So again, I think that's a huge piece of answering this question is what do you do when they start to maybe lose that engagement over time? Having that front point of reference where they did feel the way that you want them to feel at work at the beginning of their journey with your company, I think that's a really important place for them to be able to come back to mentally. So whether you have that or not, I think what contributes to an employee becoming passive is typically either the work that they're doing, they lose interest in the domain, or it changes. Kind of what they signed up to do is now a little bit different, and that's a little bit less interesting for them. You see it with changes in leadership, changes in company direction, and a lot of times it's just, if you peel back all the layers of the onion, I think it's psychological safety more than anything too, right? We start to lose a little bit of trust, and so we pull back a little bit, I think, naturally. Yeah. What do you think,
All right.
Laura?
Laura,
Yeah.
what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think, and maybe this is the theoretical side coming out of it, but I always refer back to the hierarchy of needs as well. We need to have our cup filled in certain aspects, and sometimes if one isn't filled, you do tend to sort of take a step back. Perhaps what you're doing doesn't fill you with joy as much as it did before. So I think we'll get onto this later, but there are intrinsic values, obviously, but then as Jenn says, when you look at the wider organization, changes miscommunication of the changes or just not bringing your employee along for the ride is a big factor in this as well. Not considering, I guess, the talent that you have, and just moving too fast potentially. But yeah, I mean, there are so many different factors that it's quite personal. But yeah.
Okay, so we approach this topic from the personal responsibility standpoint, right? About the individual finding themselves passive. Do you feel that management has any impact or influence in a employee becoming passive? And could you share maybe some experience or things you do to make sure that that doesn't happen in your company?
Mm. You want me to go first?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Jen, go
You
first,
can
please.
go first, Jen. Yeah.
This could be such a big one. You know, you got to be careful on this one. No, I 100% think, manager has so much to do with it. They say people join companies but quit managers. And
Sure.
I've seen that a million times in my career, but it's also, the manager themselves will come in and out of their own level of engagement. So timing is everything. But in my research in college, one of the things I found really interesting was learning that one of the biggest statistical factors when it comes to employee retention is hope. And it's a hard thing to measure, but having hope that there's more for me or that there's a path for me or that I'm seen and I'm going to be valued for this work is a really powerful thing. So if you've got a manager who cannot at least get out of the way of creating that space for that employee to feel hope for the future, then I think that's where you see, very sometimes quite dramatic issues.
Mm-hmm.
Or did you have a take?
That's funny because I was going to touch on sort of that sort of feeling aspect as well, and for me, it's that it's the fear element. I think managers have so much put on them now these days too. Resources are thin, um, and yeah, and sometimes I think you're right, Jen. If people don't step out of the way, or if they feel that maybe they need to micromanage, there's a lot of focus on that now. I think when we look at people becoming managers too, there's not so much emphasis, depending on the organization, on training those managers and showing them what good looks like. The difference between this is a leader, this is a manager. Who do you want to be? Who are your management idols? Let's unpack that when you join the organization so we can all start our management journey, even if you've had it before, from scratch in this organization and revisit that as well as we go on. Yeah, and building good managers is absolutely the key to maintaining good talent.
I think you all both hit the nail on the head that manager's role is probably another masterclass for another time, right? There's a lot
Yes.
to unpack there.
Hmm.
Let's move swiftly to this next question, though. How do intrinsic motivators differ from extrinsic motivators when it's time to re engage passive talent?
Hmm. I can probably start with this one.
Laura, please.
I find it interesting that we've got the word re-engage in there. I feel like engagement should be something that we do throughout the employee's journey. Um, but as we said before, there is a point where you look inside yourself and you need to ask yourself if your cup is being filled. That's really the intrinsic value there. It's okay to not have full cups everywhere, but as long as you're getting joy from some aspect of work, whether it's recognition or achieving a good piece of work or just having a great team around you, that's great. When we look at the intrinsic values, um, the parts of engagement I think that are so important is just going back and reminding your employees how great it is to work here. So things like creating an employee value proposition is key to that, and using your employees, the different demographics of which as well, and just asking them why do they stay here, how are they engaged, so you can package that story and sell it externally and internally too, and let it diffuse throughout every single message of your organization.
Mm.
Jen, what do you think?
I'm just sitting here nodding like a bobblehead, completely agree. I think, it comes back to the conversation we had about managers as well. Is the manager skilled enough to manage the person and not just manage the tasks or the work, right? I think that's an interesting thing. And when you think about culture, I think a lot about, and I think we're getting into this further, so I'll try not to go there, but that's really both intrinsic and extrinsic. It is personal. Work is personal. I hear people say, and in fact, sometimes I take a little heat for feeling this way so definitively, but I think it's incredibly personal, and that your coworkers, whether or not we want them to feel like family, become a family in certain ways, right? You're not going to give them the same, I think, long leash that you would give to family, right? You want to have boundaries and kind of healthy relationships, but the dynamics do kind of come in and and exist, whether we want them to or not. There's someone above you and someone below you. Those are words I hate. But it does start to feel like that, right? The more senior person is the boss. I have to wait for them to kind of give me the answers, and then I can share that with the person who's waiting for me to share those answers. And so I think, it is a bit of a telephone game that passes through the extrinsic into the intrinsic, right? Like, is this message that I'm getting and then sharing, something that I believe in and agree with? Is this something, to Laura's point, that fills my cup or not? Do I believe it? Does it feel authentic or not? So I think, again, it comes back to management and culture really do drive a lot of this, I think.
All right. Well, Jen, we are trending towards a question about culture, organizational culture to be exact.
Yeah.
So, in your experience, we'll have you lead the way here on this topic. How does the role of organizational culture influence the motivation of talent that might be passive, or maybe to use another term, not as engaged?
Yeah. I honestly, I keep trying to not get ahead of us here, but I really do think that's at the heart of everything. It's one example I'll use is seriousness, right? When you've got serious results to deliver, you're up against a tight timeline. Again, to Laura's point, resources are slim right now. It's just a different time in the job market than what we experienced a few years ago, and so there's so much more riding on each employee that I think it's really easy to lose sight of the need to remain lighthearted. Happy people, as Gallup says, produce 21% more results. It is good business to keep a lighthearted and happy culture, but you see it all the time, right? And big results, big goals. We have to take it really, really seriously. And I think when we take everything seriously, it almost homogenizes it and just takes away any feeling of sincerity that might remain there, right? And so we can take the work incredibly seriously, take the results and our goals incredibly seriously, while still enjoying what we do. And I think, again, I see that so often. We just lose sight of that sometimes in the rush of things. Yeah.
Laura, what do you think?
I didn't want Jen to go ahead of me there. She's so good at answering these questions. I mean, the only thing that I would really add to that is the exploration and celebration of subcultures. We've probably all worked in large organizations and smaller organizations. It's okay to find and cultivate subcultures, and particularly when we look through the lens of diversity and inclusion and equity. Sometimes it's not going to be the obvious solution to engage talent, and half the time, you need to ask your employees, how do they feel about the culture? What would they want to change? Get them involved. There's no point doing that from the top down. It all needs to be built from the bottom up, and just ask. It's really easy. There's so much theory on organizational culture, and I think if you're just starting out on this journey, it's very easy to become overwhelmed. The easiest solution from the very beginning is just to ask your employees how they feel, what they want, and then put a plan together.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe we
Yeah.
could spend some time. Or Jen, did you have some thoughts?
Can I pop on to that? I mean, this is such a big
Yes,
topic.
please go for it.
Yeah, it's
We have a
huge.
whole day on
Yeah.
culture, I think, like an offsite. Let's go. But culture is, it's not something that's passive or static. It is happening,
Hmm.
whether we're building it with intention or not. And so that's the risk, right? If we're not intentionally talking to our employees and co-creating the culture that we all want to work in, then it is a runaway train. And yeah, I think it's just something that has to be, each member of the team has to be able to participate in conversations around culture.
Yeah. We talk about culture maybe from a values perspective, right, or a belief perspective, right? But culture can also be your environment. So,
Hmm.
can you share a little bit about maybe the experience you have in your own organizations of how environment plays a role in your culture? That could be
Yeah.
for your remote workers, for your hybrid workers, for your in-person workers. Uh, how does environment, the words we say, the places we work, how does that impact
Hmm.
folks moving from passive to engaged?
Yeah, I'll jump in here, I guess, if that's okay. Just
Sure.
following on from the the thing that I said before. I work in an organization, and I have worked in organizations where 9 times out of 10 I am in one country, and then I'm working with individuals in many others, across continents. Um, Add to that, at Wakam, we've just launched something called Wakam from Anywhere, which means that actually you can do your job anywhere in the world. You don't have to be in a particular location where we have an entity. In order to do that, the big thing that we did was look at the culture. How do we keep that Wakam culture, that spirit, while still, getting access to the best talent in the world wherever they are? And again, it comes back to understanding our differences, looking at our similarities, discussing them, making sure we're okay with some things moving on, some things being kept, the things that we're really proud about, the things that we want to keep. We ensure that we instill them into the ways that we assess our talent, into the ways that we manage the performance of our talent as well, and in the way that we celebrate our talent too. So previously, where we've had, and it's such a cliche, but sort of parties in the office, how do we still celebrate that and bring recognition without having physical events? And it was a big shift for the organization. One example now is, we don't speak French as standard. We speak English as standard now. But it's okay if you still want to speak French. We have tools to manage that. But it's knowing when to take that step up and be trans organizational, as well as keeping the subculture alive in your little pocket of the world.
Mm.
Yeah.
Love that, Laura.
I love that. We're so in a similar place in our organization. I think, I've worked for global organizations over the years where they pride themselves on having like a globally shared culture. I'll pick on Apple. It's a great example. Apple will say it's going to feel the same. You go into the Apple store in Dubai, you go to the Apple store in Poughkeepsie, it's going to feel like Apple. And I think that's a really beautiful sentiment, but it's not every company, right? And our company is almost the opposite of that, in that we do business in Japan, the United States, and the UK, and they're three very distinctly different cultures. And so then a success factor of like a manager moving through our company is the ability to seamlessly work within any of those environments without, accidentally disrespecting, without slowing down work or sort of getting, so that's a tough thing to ask of people. But I think it's one thing about our culture that is also a draw, to folks, that it's not, all sort of smushed into one thing, that you really can learn a lot about these different places and different cultures of business as well. We have 53 countries represented in our Tokyo office as well. So even though we still do business as a Toyota company in a sometimes a traditional way, we're doing so with, an incredibly diverse slate of points of view.
I love that you two speak to effectively the diversity of work and how Wacom is looking for uh, sharing the brand in a similar way across the world. Whereas with Toyota, each place looks a little different to maybe reflect consumers or culture or whatever the case may be in that particular region. So I
Yeah.
love your two perspectives on that, and I think that our community will resonate with one more than the other, but it's great to have both perspectives. That's why we're hosting a masterclass.
Hmm.
Uh, Something else that people will enjoy talking about is performance management systems. Do you believe that the current performance management systems that we have today, that they're effective in addressing passive talent? And I know addressing passive talent within this context is as a broad brush, but maybe speaking to how to identify talent, motivate passive talent, check in on passive talent. Do our current performance management systems adequately reach those goals?
It's interesting. We're in the middle of this right now. Here's what I would say. I mean, short answer is performance management the tool to create engagement? I think the answer is no. Um, but I do think it can help. It can help or hurt depending upon how you do it. I think one important factor as a precursor to performance management is the talent review process, to make sure that we're teaching managers how to assess talent and calibrating them on what good looks like, so that there's equity across teams. So if you do change teams at that performance management cycle, a lot of companies have maybe a promotion cycle at the same time, that those expectations and values are the same on the other side of it. I think where, at least in my experience, what I see is when people get really disengaged, it's typically because they're no longer feeling seen or valued in some way, right? And so the performance management piece could be a make or break. So if you're doing a talent review process up front and you've got 10 people on your team, 3 of those roles are critical, and you think you've got 2 of those 3 that are a flight risk, you get to the performance management process, and that's your opportunity, right, to express to that employee that they are seen and valued. It's your opportunity to kind of win it back. And so I think it could be a make or break in that way. Hopefully it doesn't, come down to that, but it also can make someone feel very devalued depending upon your performance management kind of rating system. If you've got a system that is sort of ambiguous and it says, maybe your meets expectation feels like it's less valuable than it really is, it's going to feel like a hit when it's meant to feel like something more, right? So I think you really have to counterbalance depending upon the system that you're working with.
Mm-hmm. I couldn't have said it better myself, but I do have 2 things to add. So when we talk about performance management system, one way that I like to look at it is skills management system. So moving away from looking at people's performance, but looking at the skills they're doing well, the competencies, if you will, whether they're soft or technical, and making sure, as Jenn said, that there is equity across the business. Now, the reason why this is becoming more important, in my opinion, is as we move into the world of AI, I've seen some really cool tools lately where we are using AI to match the skills that somebody has to where they want to go, and then assessing the gaps and helping them find either talent. Opportunities or learning opportunities or matching them with a mentor to fill those gaps while they're waiting for their ideal role. And it's okay to have a talent review process, but it's really important to understand, okay, we've reviewed our talent, what are we going to do with them until we have the right move, or moving the lower performers out of it, but even considering how do we keep those guys engaged, what's the context, why are they perhaps not performing as well as they want to or we need them to. So thinking less about performance management, but thinking about it more holistically, skills management is definitely something to consider. And the other thing that I would add to that is, when we look at performance, again, we need to look at potential as well. So if you are assessing performance, you should always be, in my opinion, assessing potential too. It is really difficult, but there is a lot of learning out there about how to do it. And again, lots of different tools that can help us. Because, it's great to have talent with high potential, but then, do they see themselves as having potential? Do they want to make a move? You've got to understand the context before creating the solutions. So yeah, that would be my points.
Mm-hmm.
Well, so we are in the, I guess this is the final question that we have to share, but there's some room to have more expansive discussion. Um, let's talk about mentorship. Have mentorship programs demonstrated a significant impact on re-engaging passive talent in your organizations? Laura, let's start with you.
I'm quite passionate about this. We've literally we've just created and launched a new mentorship program actually at Wakam, and one of the reasons was, we just finished our performance and potential management process. And we did realize that, we did have quite a few people who perhaps needed more support on achieving either a small skill. We had skills like returning to work after maternity leave. Well, it's not a skill, is it? But how do you manage that? Perhaps things like stakeholder management, changing your communication style, some of those softer ones that aren't really obvious. So what we found was when we spoke to our leaders about this, 9 out of 10 of them put their hand up and said, "Oh, I want to be a mentor. Please, can I be a mentor?" That's great, but what you also want to do is look at the lower level and just really think about, okay, who else excels at what they do? Because for me, a mentorship program is great at engaging talent in your organization, but it's also great at engaging leaders and reminding them what they're good at and reminding them what good leadership looks like, and helping people who perhaps are more scattered across the world, to find that connection with a central, with a central team, or a team that they perhaps don't have opportunities to work with, removes some of those things like proximity bias, for example, and just eventually opens up the talent marketplace internally to a whole load more opportunity. I'm a big advocate of mentorship programs.
It sounds like
I
it.
think you can tell. Yeah.
Yes, 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 certainly, and our community is benefiting from your experience. Jen, what are your thoughts on mentorship and engaging passive talent?
I'm such a Laura fangirl. I can't even. It's true. I mean, I'm with you, Laura. I think there's when I think about mentorship, it's almost a two ways to look at it. I guess in my mind, many ways to look at it. But if I were picking two, I guess I think about peer mentorship as something that is that can completely ignite engagement. I think it's incredibly important. The great punchline of the human experience is all of the blind spots that we are each riddled with. Right? I will never know what kind of vibe I am putting off right now. You know what I mean? And so it's sometimes really wonderful to have a peer mentor where there's not maybe that level of, seniority gap between us. It maybe removes any veil between that relationship and the truth, and really letting each other see, each other's blind spots, and how can I help you? And maybe watching you, I'm seeing something in myself. So I think there's a lot of learning that can come from peer matching. I think most of the time when we think about mentorship, it's more that senior representation, which I think representation is the key word. When you're thinking about growing your career, representation matters more than anything. Myself, I have I call it my personal board of directors, kind of my crew of mentors that I go to for these things. And sometimes it's just because I need to see them. What are you doing up there? Do you want to turn around behind you and reach your hand and bring me with you? Show me that path, right? And so sometimes, again, it comes back to that quantitative hope, the importance of instilling hope in, oh, I could be you. Okay, now I can see how to get there. Or maybe I don't want to be you, and now I can see that too. But either way, it's giving me more direction and hopefully a little bit of, pep in your step, a little more engagement toward whatever that goal is.
Great. Now, as far as mentorship goes, you'd mentioned top-down mentorship. Are there any thoughts you want to share, maybe specifically on reverse mentorship and how that shows up at work? Maybe Jen will go with you, and then Laura, you can land the plane here.
I love the idea of reverse mentorship, but if I'm being honest with you, I haven't seen it done well yet in my own experience. I've heard wonderful stories, but in my whatever 25 years, I've seen. Where I've seen that kind of conversation be successful has been more outside of the workplace, when leaders are truly seeking growth, and they're finding those moments themselves, or working with kind of executive coaches that are helping to build things like that. So I think establishing a great executive coaching program is a great place to start, to identify, what are the gaps? What is this person interested in hearing? Because I think first and foremost, it's got to start with someone who's ready for feedback. And I think at depending on your leadership level or your level of seniority, that also comes in seasons, right? Sometimes we're really listening, and sometimes we don't want to right now.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
I think it's a good place to start.
Okay.
Mhm.
Helpful information. Laura, what are your thoughts on the reverse mentorship
Yeah,
piece?
I agree with Jen. I've not really ever seen a program created around that, or any particular process, but I guess if we look at the context of it, we look at the idea of it, as leaders, we can, just make sure our leaders are opening themselves up to their teams, having the humility and braveness to ask for feedback directly, but also the simplicity of, just owning up to your own mistakes, being informal and open and warm. I think you're going to find that reverse mentorship coming through by osmosis, I guess. You don't sometimes need to ask for it or be formal, because if you are warm and open anyway, then it will come to you. But really, it's about remembering two things like, and again, theory, so great. Things like the grow model, etc. Asking somebody, do you want feedback? Can you give me some? And just opening those communication channels, so that, if you do something next time, somebody does have the confidence to say, hey, we talked about the grow model. I think we can probably see something here, or, however that manifests. But yeah, I don't think we need to put a label on it. It might be happening anyway.
Yeah. think 360 feedback is probably
Yeah.
the closest thing I've seen that actually works well, I think, or consistently, maybe is a better term. I think it's great to have it anonymized, for that way you don't have to wait, for those moments, or when, you can really open it up, for better or worse. I know from my own career, I've had huge growth moments through receiving 360 feedback. It's an incredible gift. And so I think it would be wonderful to also create a well-working reverse mentorship program, but I would say at least build a great 360 plan.
Awesome. So this is great advice, because here at the Masterclass, as much as just about telling people what to do, we also want to encourage people to consider what not to do, or what to proceed with caution about if you are looking to deploy it. So, Jenn Longbine, Laura Edwards, it's truly been a pleasure chatting with you on this Estriva Masterclass on engaging passive talent. How can our community stay in touch with you outside of this program?
I would say LinkedIn. And thank you so
Mm-hmm.
much, Joey. This has been so fun. And Laura, love chatting with you and just getting to kind of swap ideas. I've taken away a lot from this, but happy have an open LinkedIn network. Happy to connect with anyone.
Always. Same. Thanks, Joey. Thanks, Jenn. It's amazing.
All right. Thank you both for being on our panel today, and to our community. Thank you for tuning in, and be sure to check out our growing library of content featuring experts such as Laura and Jenn. Until next time, have a great day.